for joining us today. My name's Dee, and I'm your host for the Trauma-Informed Leadership Roundtable. I want to go ahead and introduce everybody. So let's go ahead and Anne, tell us who you are, what you do for a living, and what is one thing that you do for self-care.
Hi, my name is Kramer. I go by Anne. I am a clinical social worker. I provide trauma therapy services at the Department of Veteran Affairs. And one thing I have to do for self-care is work out.
Thank you. And Jennie, you are next. Same questions.
Hi, I'm Jennie Marsh. I'm a licensed master's level social worker, and I've been a social worker for about 24, 25 years, and I've worked in a number of settings that involved, in every setting, trauma-informed work. So that's how I ended up here. And one of the things I do for self-care is I also, in addition to the consulting work I do, I'm a fiction writer, and I spend a lot of time writing in my off work hours.
I love it. Chrissy?
Chrissy Cordingley. I am from Winnipeg, Manitoba. I am in Canada, but I'm only like a 45-minute drive from the States. And I am a Canadian registered safety professional by trade, and I specialize mostly in psychological safety and behavior-based safety. And now I currently work for a company called Ignite Purpose, which is a global brand that helps people with well-being at work. My self-care routine is I like to do at nighttime yin yoga. So it's a stretchy, relaxed yoga that I use to decompress at night before bed.
Thank you. Katharine?
Hello from Washington, D.C. I'm Katharine Manning. I am a lawyer who now does training and consultation on building trauma-informed workplaces. That's through my own company, which is called Blackbird. I'm also the author of The Empathetic Workplace, 5 Steps to a Compassionate, Calm, and Confident Response to Trauma on the Job. My self-care, for a while now, what I've been doing is a little meditation and a gratitude journal. That's what keeps me even keeled.
Yeah, those gratitude journals are just amazing. Thank you. Mel, what you got?
Well, hello, Dee. My name is Jarmel Bell. I am from Tree, Arkansas, one of the few cities in the world that only has that name. And I am a connection developer. I really work with individuals. I've written a book titled I Am Me. And so really focus on getting to know thyself. And my self-care thing that I love to do is music makes me lose control. So I listen to a lot of music for meditation, and it's just really fulfilling.
Yeah, I have to agree with that one as well. All right, JW, you are next.
Hey, everybody. Thank you. Let's see. My name's Jason Womack. Go by JW. I am based right now in Montgomery, Alabama. Grew up in the state of California. Along the way, I moved and lived in Mexico. I lived in Argentina, and I've made a life and a career out of studying what gets people to communicate more clearly and what gets people to shut down completely. And where that intersection comes, I found that when people communicate what they need, I was brought up being told that taking care of myself was selfish. In my adult years, I've actually learned that the best thing I can do for you as my friend is to actually take care of myself. The more I'm okay, the more we're okay. For self-care, it's a tool that I got from a mentor of mine in 2007. January, we were having breakfast, and my mentor, Jim, as I was explaining a new business that we were building, and I was showing him my business plan, my financial plan, my marketing plan, he asked me, what is your gratitude plan for your business? And since January of 2007, at the end of every day, I write a thank you card. My thank you cards have a format. They're about 150 to 200 words long. And it is my 5 to 10 minutes of actually stopping and seeing just how beautiful the world is.
That's beautiful. I love that. Thank you. And I am Dee. I live in Roanoke, Virginia, and I work with Ignite Purpose. And I also own my own business, Fire Within Coaching. And I specialize in psychological safety and trauma-informed leadership. That's what lights my fire. And for self-care, I do all of the things that you guys said, right? I write, I do version yoga, and then I love to dance. All right. Thank you guys all for being here. I really appreciate it. This is absolutely beautiful that we can get people that really didn't know each other too well before this. And now we're together because we all have one common purpose. So I'm going to go ahead and start the roundtable with our first question. Why is it hard for us to talk about trauma? I think trauma is really difficult because trauma's not a one size fit all thing, right? The fact is that we all have trauma. And if we can't talk about the trauma, then we're not going to heal. It's hard to talk about because nobody wants to admit the nasty stuff that goes on inside them because it's uncomfortable to talk about feelings. That's why I think it's hard. So anybody want to pick up on that?
I would totally agree with you, Dee, and that was pretty much what I was thinking too, because it's hard to talk about something that isn't easily categorized or labeled, right? Trauma itself has a pretty clear definition about being emotional consequences that appear after living through a distressing event or a period of distress. And although trauma is clearly defined, the spectrum of which those events can be labeled as distressing really can vary between all sorts of different people. If we express we have trauma, also there tends to be this trend that the traumatized person is the one that's responsible for all their healing rather than accountability. So we don't want to place a burden on others either. And that can be complex because trauma can also involve people that we're in relationships with, people that we love and hold dearly. And then there's a whole other layer that goes on top of speaking about the trauma. It isn't just about my hurt. Now I could be hurting you while I talk about what's hurting me.
Exactly. And then we re-traumatize. Then you're talking about re-traumatization. And what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think what Chrissy said was great. And I like to add on to what she said is our own personal experiences prevent us from being able to be present for other people. So if we haven't had supportive environments where we felt safe, where we felt like what we've experienced was important, or if we haven't had a trauma, we don't know how to show up for someone else. So both those aspects can come into play when we're faced with an employee that brings that trauma to us.
Exactly. There's also the part where we try to understand trauma, and by understanding the trauma, sometimes we do more damage rather than just sitting and being that empathetic ear. Jennie?
I agree with everything that's been said. One thing I would add to it as well, a lot of my work has been done with victims of survivors of violence, survivors of homicide or domestic violence or sexual assault. And so sometimes that type of trauma or some types of trauma can have an additional layer of fear along with how are people going to, is this going to change the way someone sees me, or how are they going to react to me? A lot of survivors of homicide, for example, even a few months after are starting to get responses like it's time to move on and they're in a better place, and those kinds of things that people I think sometimes say out of their own, like you said, Dee, out of their own want to try to help someone feel better. And instead that can often create additional traumatic response on top of that, or it's re-traumatizing for someone. So I think it depending on the type of trauma and who was involved and how long it's been, and all of those things, I think can have a big impact on how challenging it is for folks to talk about it.
Katharine, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, just to pick up on what Jennie was saying, one of the things I think is challenging is the tendency everyone has to blame people for the bad things that happen to them. There's just this kind of instinctive, when you hear that something befell someone, you start looking for what was their behavior that led to that outcome. This is something that I just saw so often. Despite everybody saying blaming the victim is really bad, it was just so common that I actually did a little research on it and found out there's a whole psychological concept called the just world bias, that we want to believe that life is fair and people get what they deserve. And so we will look for what was it that the person did that led to this bad outcome. And so when you open up about something that has happened to you, one of the things I think people are concerned about is, what are they going to think about me now based on this? Either that I'm not going to be reliable because I've been through something traumatic, or what did I do to cause it? And also, I think it's important to recognize that not everybody has the same freedom to talk openly and vulnerably about what they've been through. I heard a man speak. He's the head of probation for a large county, and he's an African-American man, one of the only Black men in this high of a position of leadership. And he also said he has the highest ACEs score of anybody he's ever met. And he said, I do talk about that in my work with my colleagues, but I don't go into a lot of detail about it because I don't want to be opening myself up like that.
Jarmel, what were you going to say?
I was just thinking about like also the rumination of it, like just those repeated, how Katharine was just saying with the ACEs scores, just their repeated remembrance of that adverse childhood experience that might have happened during childhood years or even into your teen years or just in life in general. And so trying to have them to relive those moments is terrifying for people, especially when in the school system and there's limited opportunity to really learn how to have tough conversations or learn limited opportunities to really learn how to express your emotions and trust in a environment or culture or community that can embrace you being vulnerable. And when we have people, to me, that's what also adds to why it's tough to try to discuss and share and talk about trauma.
Yeah, it's a really good point. JW?
I am deepening the gratitude for this community that's come together and listening to everything that was said. I was not taught how to receive someone discussing their trauma. And the tools that I had up until my mid-20s was I'm going to do with some. And then I learned how to be with. And that to me was the opening. So to this day, I will receive someone sharing their humanity. Some people will say they are sharing vulnerably. I've just realized that the most vulnerable sharing that I hear is when people are actually sharing that they're a human being. And it's fascinating if I'm in a group and there's someone sharing their trauma, there are people in the group who want to do with the person, right? How quickly they want to give them a tissue if they start crying, how quickly they want to pat them on the shoulder and say, it's okay. And the training I got through one of the journeys I went on was, I'm going to be with you. I'm not going to try and match your emotion. I'm not going to try and out-emote you. Carolyn Miss was a teacher that I learned a ton from way back when, and she gave me the term woundology. Basically, I'm going to listen to someone's trauma until I have a trauma that is somewhere close to their trauma, and then I'm going to try and compete with who has a bigger trauma. And it's this weird world of why is it hard to talk about it? I was not trained to receive someone talking about trauma. And that was my gateway. And that's what I hope that people listening and watching this can get from it is here's how to receive someone sharing what they went through.
I love that. Yeah. And it's so true. That's probably the biggest problem is just that we were never taught. We were never taught how to be vulnerable. We were never taught how to give or receive vulnerability.
I wanted to say, add on to what JW said about I am just being present, ready to receive, because in social work school, we're taught that throughout your schooling, you're continued to taught how to be empathetic for people. And the only way to learn that is the experience. And so when someone brings you pain, you should actually look at that as it's a gift because it actually widens our heart. And so if we can be present for that, it is a gift because that shows that they trust you in some way and they wouldn't have brought that to you if that wasn't present.
That's beautiful. Yeah, I love that. So our next question is, what are the challenges of listening to someone talk about their trauma?
I think one of the challenges is we're geared to try to figure out if we need to have a solution or have a response. And I think we're so programmed that, especially as men, as being providers and protectors, and women as being nurturers, that we think we have to know the answer. And so I think it's extremely terrifying that when somebody comes, our default setting is, what's the answer? Versus just being in a space that allows someone to just share. And one of the most effective things is just someone being there and not even have to speak but just your presence. And I think that makes it extremely challenging for someone that's not confident in themselves to be able to be like, you know what, I'm just here to support. And even if the question is asked, what's the answer? I don't know, but I know I'm here with you. And just offering some space, this gift, like we just here together. And let's just take this journey together. And I don't know where it's going to happen, but I just know I'm here with you. So I think that's one of the challenges.
Yeah, I have to agree with that. Katharine?
Yeah, I completely agree. I think of it almost like a physical space. People talk about, can you hold this space for somebody? And I think it is really hard. I've been doing this since I started doing hotline work when I was in college, right? I've been doing it for decades. And still, I can have a conversation like in the last week where somebody says something, I feel like I've been punched in the stomach. And all I want is for this not to be true, for this person not to have gone through this experience. distance. And so there's this temptation, like, okay, you've just told me you're in this painful place. Can we just pretend you're not there? So can we either distract from it? Like, it's all going to work out for the best. You're so strong. Let's talk about how strong you are. Or just deny it. Oh, you probably misunderstood. And it's the hardest thing to just keep yourself from doing that. And instead just say, I'm here with you. I don't know what's going to happen. I don't have an answer. I can't save you from this pain, but I'm willing to sit here with you through it. That's a really hard thing to do because we absorb it. You feel that pain that the others are going through. And if you don't have healthy ways of processing that yourself, it can start to pile up in you too. So that's why that self-care piece is so important if you're going to continue doing this work.
Absolutely. Jennie, what do you think?
Obviously agree with everything that's been said. I think one of the things that this brought up for me is thinking about my early years as a social worker. And one of the things that I tended to fall back on as I was getting my feet under me as a social worker was when I was doing work with domestic violence and sexual assault victims was I would pull out my checklist of here's all the things I need to make sure that we figure out, right? I went into problem solving mode because it was so much easier than sitting with someone. And I think that's one of the things I think about, and I talk about a lot with folks who are not social workers or therapists, is there's a huge area between being an unsupportive, unhelpful person and being a therapist, right? Nobody expects you to be a therapist, but there are lots of things you can do to be helpful to somebody that doesn't involve solving their problem and doesn't involve going deep into their trauma history and working through a therapeutic process with them. I think that's where people sometimes struggle getting comfortable is finding that place that's not a problem solver, that's not a fixer in any way, but is there to hold space and be there with the person in that moment, which if you talk to survivors of violence or other types of trauma, looking back, how important that was. And I think that's it's something that people have to get comfortable with in order to feel more comfortable talking to people about their trauma.
Thank you. Chrissy?
Yeah, I'm not a social worker or a therapist, so my experience is I agree with everybody. And for what you guys do with people, it's amazing. I know it's a very serious conversation, but when I read that prompt, I thought it's probably really challenging when someone doesn't even know that they're talking about their trauma, because I've been in that position too, where they're sharing something very wow, and you're like, and they're acting like that's a normal memory from their childhood, like that's just how it was growing up, or that's how it was at this other workplace. And you have to not project what you consider traumatizing on them either, right? Because you can feel it for them, but it really has to be them wanting to share it in that light or be willing to see. It is a balance, right? Like, how far do we go down this road? I'm not a therapist. I can't help with this, but I can clearly see there's some stuff that hurt you and it explains some of your behavior now. So how do we help you get on with your behavior? And that's my role, right? Working in safety would be a little bit different. Not so much identifying the trauma and working them through it, but being aware that it's there. And how do I need to lead them, guide them so that we're not triggering that and finding ways for them to feel confident in what they're doing.
All right. And Anne, with that.
I think everything everyone said is spot on. A big challenge that I find when working with veterans is this fear of judgment around their shame or around what it means to express emotions. A lot of my male clients to say that if I show my emotions, that means I'm weak. But going along with what Chrissy said is that you can see pain on people. And so we're not always going to know the answer, but really the answer is letting them know that it's okay to share your emotions. It's okay to share whatever's coming up for you and let me know what I can do for you. And even when they can't share and you're just saying that, that's very validating. And most times silence can be the answer. Just giving them that silence to really process like what's happening in the moment. And when you give them that space, that can be healing in itself.
Perfect.
I'm at the very practical. I'm going through, I'm looking at the screen and look at folks, this is an extra on your plate. The work that you did to get to this room, the work that you're doing right now to give all of your focus to this. I think the elephant in the room for me about why it's challenging for me to listen to someone share their trauma, it's time. There's 96 blocks of 15 minutes in a day. And Dunbar's number, Richard Dunbar, he told us that we can have this many close associations. And I'm telling you right now, if you have 120 close associations, many of them have trauma. And so now all of a sudden I have to take a look at my calendar. I have to take a look at my watch. I have to take a look at what time did I start this morning? And when that buddy texts me and says, got a minute? Yes, of course. And then there's this cascading effect on what I won't get done because I just spent as long as it takes. And so I want to make the case for a reason that those of you listening to this, it's going to be challenging listening to people discuss their trauma because you're busy. But the people listening to this, because you're busy, that we need you to have these skills, these tools, these tactics.
So I love that you brought that up because I've been in situations where you have 5 minutes because I have to go here and I have to go here, I have to go here. And what we don't understand on the opposite end is you're essentially re-traumatizing them because you don't know their trauma. What if my trauma is abandonment? What if I'm afraid that you're going to leave me and you don't have 5 minutes for me to just vent or for me to talk? That's going to make me not want to talk to you and not want to open up. And that's going to take that trust out the window.
I do want to add something to that, though. I think that's so valid. And also, we know that the vast majority of people have experienced at least one incident, if not many instances of emotional trauma. And that includes leaders too, right? That includes the folks that are the ones that people are coming to. It includes therapists. It includes many folks. And so there is also that balance of if you have that time in the day, knowing that a 10-minute or a 60-minute or however long it takes conversation with someone about what they're going through could also take you offline for the next day or two if it is something that's re-traumatizing for you with your history of trauma. So there is a whole, I think we'll probably get to this in some of the other questions too, but I think that is also something to recognize that you also have to be, in addition to the skill set of just being able to sit with someone in the space that they need, you also have to be aware of your own, the reactions that you're having, what's activating for you, what you can and can't take on at that moment too, because you're certainly the whole metaphor of the putting your oxygen mask on first before you help someone else. So those things I think are really important too, that we recognize that in trauma-informed leadership. That's part of it. It's not just being able to sit with someone, but it's being able to do that in a way that's not going to re-traumatize you as well.
Okay, point. Does anyone else have anything to add to our second question before we go on?
I do. Real quick, and like what Jennie was saying, one of the pieces of advice that I try to share with people is be mindful of the season that someone's in when they give you an advice. So if I'm happily married and I'm speaking to a couple that's going through marital problems, I may be like, hey, y'all gonna make it. Like, figure it out, stick it out, right? But if I'm in a dry season or just coming through divorce, my bias is going to be more negative towards, hey, give up. And so I think, saying like a person really does have to be mindful and aware, where is my influence coming from? What season of life am I in? And can I handle this? And trying to make sure I'm not projecting something on someone that's not favorable in this season.
I think that's a great point. Next, we want to talk about benefits of talking about trauma. Chrissy, you are up. So benefits of talking about trauma.
Thank you. I think Jarmel said something earlier about normalization of trauma in a negative way, where we try to tell ourselves that's just how life is, or they went through that because they did XYZ and that created that. We'd like to think we have this little sense of control. But I think normalization can also work in a positive way, where when we can share our lived experiences, be heard that they're valid, even if they're not the same as the next person who maybe went through the same thing as us. That's really what it comes down to. It almost boils into the diversity field, right? Where we now can understand that it's not one size fits all. Not everybody's going to have the same level of reaction. And it gives people that validity, that what they're feeling, what they're actually experiencing is true because it's true for them. So we're not, I think, so there's that. And then that would come also with a reduction in the gaslighting, right? Which is also what Jarmel talked about, that, oh, you deserve that because you made those choices. So you lay in the bed that you whatever, that victim shaming piece, when it's not about that at all. So the more we talk about it, the more like, yeah, that really happened. I could see why you feel that way. I could see why that had such an effect on you. And I think, again, it's just a lived experience. I think that is really important to see people for their experiences.
Because even if you have to put perspective into it, because even if like siblings, for example, like they might have grown up together and everything, but then have two totally different recounts of what the childhood was actually like, because they're two different people. It's not a one size fit all.
I tell my kids all the time, because they have very different relationships with their dad, same dad. And I always say, I know it seems odd, but two things can be true at the same time. So he can be a great dad in this area, and then this can also be an issue in this area for that person. So two things can be true at one time. So it's not black or white, it's all one or the other. And I think helping people navigate the nuances of trauma and their pain is really important.
I love that. Thank you. Katharine, what do you think?
I completely agree with Chrissy on the modeling piece of it. I think that's essential. Again, going back to that man who's the head of probation, who can stand up as he's talking and talk about his own experience as a child. I think that makes it okay for others to talk about it as well. But I guess when I think about this, I think about an experience I had recently where I did a training for chiefs of police on trauma-informed leadership. And I was talking about compassion fatigue. And I said, compassion fatigue, when we're repeatedly exposed to trauma of others and we aren't able to deal with it in healthy ways, it can lead over time to compassion fatigue, which is a diminution in your emotions. Like you can see something really awful and you don't get an emotional response at all. And as I said this, a guy in the back of the room started to laugh. And he said, I haven't felt anything in years. He said, I watched my son die in front of me on the football field, and I was sitting up there in the stands and I couldn't feel anything at all. He later clarified his son was brought back to life, right? They were able to work on him and bring him back. But he said, I'm just sitting there. My wife is panicking and I have no reaction. I'm just hollow. And I talked to him about compassion fatigue and coming back for it. So I said all the things, but I got to admit, I came back feeling hollow and hopeless. And I'm thinking, this is a chief of police and you can't muster an emotional response for your own son. Think about all the other sons, that you're dealing with in the community or on your force. And I came back feeling that, is that tertiary trauma? I don't even know what you call it, but it hit me hard. And so what I did after a day or so, I called up some friends and I talked about it. I talked about it with best friend from college. The most helpful was I called up a minister who I'm friends with. And I was like, Bishop, this was hard. And I don't see a way out. I feel like there is no hope in the future. What are we going to do? And he was great as a listener. Like he gave me that compassionate listening that I needed. And I felt better afterward and was able to continue doing this work. And I think that's what we have to do to avoid getting to that place of I can't feel anything anymore.
Because we have to feel it, right? Because that's our humanity. So we have to feel it.
Yep.
So that's a great point. Jarmel, do you want to go next?
Sometimes I hear people making this statement, I will complain, but it won't do any good. And I was like, yeah, well, because there's so many sayings out here that to me are false. But what they do is cripple the mind of wanting to find those benefits of this doesn't agree with my values, or this experience didn't agree with my belief system, right? And so what happens is by default, I start shutting down. And I just want to hold all these things in because the world is telling me no need to talk about it, right? This complaining is a dissatisfaction and I don't need to express it. I didn't like this, or this happened in my life, and you just get over it, or don't worry about it. And so I think just getting to that space of losing yourself. And so when people are trying to birth it out, they don't have it and they just deplete it. And I don't even know what to say. And I say this last thing, even as a teacher, that was one of the fears of parents coming to parent-teacher conference, because they felt like they were going to be highlighted for not knowing fifth grade math or sixth grade math. And that intimidation of feeling like they was going to be belittled, like the TV show, Are You Smarter Than a Fifth Grader? And so all these things play into this narrative of, I don't need to talk. I don't need to express myself and come out and look like a fool. And so if we continue to try to encourage people to find their compassion, and I think all of it is beneficial. It doesn't matter what you say, just say it, just get it off of your chest, just get it out.
Jennie, what do you have next?
I'm so glad that I'm speaking after Jarmel because everything that he said just inspired a couple of thoughts. And one is a quote that I really like that I wrote about in our preparation for this talk is from Brene Brown, where she talks about leaders have to invest time in addressing fears and feelings and or they're going to squander time later in dealing with the result of all of those fears and feelings not coming out, right? So I think it goes, it's all good and well to say to people, get it out, talk about these things, find supportive people. But I think we also have to have organizational cultures, like thinking about leaders, we have to have organizational cultures that support that and that have structure, not just people, pockets of a supervisor here and there that's willing to talk with their employees or help people work through things they're dealing with, but as an organizational culture, more broadly based, it needs to be structured in. And I'll do a shameless plug for Katharine's book, The Empathetic Workplace, which I think is an excellent tool in thinking about how as leaders we can create workplaces that really support minimizing the impacts of trauma, recognizing the impacts of trauma, supporting people dealing with trauma. All of that is really important in order to be able to create a space where people do feel safe dealing with their trauma.
Thank you for that. And it's not a shameless plug. Anne, you're next.
I don't know how I can add to everything that everyone already said, but I'm thinking about sharing an analogy that kind of will hopefully tie into the things that you guys have shared, because trauma is experienced physically, mentally, and emotionally. So if you get into a car accident, which I did a few months ago, there's many things that happen to your vehicle. And when you take it to the shop and it gets fixed, it looks beautiful. They tell you you're good to go. That's not always the case, because when I drove off and my alarm sensors are still going off, but it looks okay, that doesn't mean it's okay. Why do we put so much emphasis in our fixing things and not us? So like a car accident, we have to recalibrate ourselves because our emotions are out of whack, our mind is out of whack, and we are physically out of whack because we carry that trauma. And so if we can think about it, you need to do that whole overhaul just like you would with your vehicle. We have to do that with ourselves because you carry that. And if you don't, it just stays there. It doesn't go away.
I love that. You might not want to talk about your feelings, but they're going to come out. They'll come out one way or another, which is why it's such a benefit to have a trauma-informed leader to talk about these things so it doesn't come out in ways that could possibly get you fired.
In light of what you just said, I just want to read the actual quote from Brene Brown that I got wrong. Leaders must either invest a reasonable amount of time attending to fears and feelings or squander an unreasonable amount of time trying to manage ineffective and unproductive behavior. Like you said, it comes out in lots of different ways in the workplace, even if it seems to have nothing to do with what's actually happening in that moment.
Thank you for that. JW, what are your thoughts?
Katharine, you said something I had to write down. I felt better, so I was able to continue doing my work. And I think that if I look at the question, what are the benefits of talking about trauma, is it gives us a way to get, and it's not back to. I've stopped saying get back to. I'm not going to get back to something. I'm going to get to something. I was with a group today and I called a couple folks out. My experience is you got through the activity I offered you, and there were some of you got to the activity I offered you. And I said, both of you are now finished. How am I going to get to it? How am I going to get through it? And where am I going to focus? So as I think about what the benefits are, I want to ask for those of you listening to this in the podcast, what are the benefits to you of hearing these 7 people talk through some of these things? Thank you.
Perfect. All right. So last question is, how do I hear people talk about their trauma? So who wants that first?
And share my quick tricks for this. It's pretty easy. Breathe. Keep breathing. Don't forget to keep breathing. Another one that helps me a lot to stay present is engaging my senses. So I'm a very tactile person. I often will, sometimes I'll touch my fingers under the desk, or I put my hand on the desk and feel, does it feel smooth or rough? Maybe for you, it's counting out 3 blue things in the room, or noticing the smell of yourself coffee from the next room. Just something that grounds you in the present moment can help you stay with somebody. I also want to share just quickly, I heard a Native American elder who was an activist speak, and she said this great thing. She said, when you're an activist, when you're doing this kind of work, sometimes people will come at you in anger, and that's fine. She said, you stand strong like a warrior, but you got to grow a tail down to the earth. And she said, you just let all that crap go right through you and down to Mother Earth, because she's the only one who can take crap and turn it into flowers. So I feel like that sometimes with trauma, I'm just letting it flow right through me and giving it to Mother Earth.
I love that. I love that. I'm writing that down. All right. So Chrissy, you're up next.
I think if it's a purposeful conversation, the number one thing that I would do is just ask their permission to either witness what they need to say, to be present with them, ask for permission if I feel that maybe I have an insight that I can share, but always ask them for what they actually want from me to make sure that it is consensual, that I am supporting them the way that they want to be supported. And then for myself, self-care, definitely, because I like that Katharine brought that up, because absolutely, how do you not take that on if you're an empathetic person? How do you walk away and feel the sadness or the pain, but be able to release it in a healthy way?
Anne?
One thing that I do when I want to be present to hear someone's trauma is I make sure that I physically show them that I'm ready to, so that aligns with what I'm saying. I've been in conversations where the person's talking to the computer and not looking at me, and I know that completely shuts me down. And so I don't want to do that to another person. So I make sure that I'm in an environment where it's private and that they know, like, I am physically here for you, and that you can see that I am looking at you and I'm ready to receive what you want to share.
And Jarmel.
Hearing these responses, moment of transparency, I think I probably suck at hearing people's trauma.
I doubt that. I highly doubt that, but continue.
Nah, I had to learn how to kind of self-reflect on my own. So like I get motion sickness easy. And when I would be on an airplane and experience turbulence, it used to be really rough, right? But then I had to start shifting my mind to imagine myself riding over railroad tracks. And so once I learned that I could visualize the railroad tracks in the airway, that I wasn't going to drive out the sky, it allowed me to be grounded. And so I think between that and then speaking with my wife about different situations, it allowed me to get to a place to where, even in my book, we just talk about people are free to be who they are, right? And I try not to project whatever that experience is. And I try to be as neutral as possible with whatever your experience is, whether I think it's traumatic or not, like it's your experience. And I try not to take ownership of that experience and either heighten it or minimize it. Allow them to communicate it at the level of intensity that it is for them. And so that's how I try to, my mindset has to shift to, okay, how can I help them get stabilized? And I need to match that energy. And that's why I was using the airplane example. I want to make sure you're stable.
Yeah.
And so I don't want you freaking out.
Right.
Then I'm sitting over here all nonchalant. So I need to figure out how to meet you where you are and let you know that I got you.
I love that. Jennie, what you got?
I think everyone's done a great job of offering up specific tools for individuals to use. I think the thing that I would add is, for me, even though I'm a social worker and have been through a lot of training, once I became a supervisor and in different positions of leadership, while I used a lot of my social work skills, there was some additional work that needed to happen on my part in really being a trauma-informed leader. And one of the things that was really helpful for me, given my personality, is it helped me a lot to work on my confidence and in making sure that I could be helpful to someone. So what I did, in addition to having the social work background, getting familiar with what resources were available for folks, getting familiar with what was available in the community, what was available through the workplace, what I could refer people to when it was time, and really normalize those things, rather than if I wanted to let people know about a specific community resource that I thought might be helpful for them, if they wanted that information from me, rather than trying to find it and looking it up and saying, I wonder what they do, let's read the website and that kind of thing. While that still can be helpful, being able to say, there is this agency available. This is what my understanding is of what they do. This might be a place for you to check out, or it's an option for you to check out. Just normalizing that help seeking beyond this conversation, I think was really helpful for me, just getting some of those tools in my toolbox in order to feel ready to have some of those conversations with the people that I supervised and that I worked with.
Yeah, I love that. That's a great answer. I think for myself, it was doing the self-work. So really doing the self-work and tapping into my empathy power, tapping into my compassion, and really just realizing that we're all human at the end of the day. I'll accept you as a human if you come to me, and I just ask you to do the same, accept me as a human. And by accepting me as a human and me accepting you as a human, it means we're both flawed and we're both probably going to make mistakes, and that's okay. We just need to talk about it and have that open line of communication. So those are all of my questions. Does anybody want to add anything just as a closing statement?
This was awesome.
Thank you all for doing this, and maybe we'll do it again sometime soon. Thank you so much.
Thanks, everybody.
Everyone.